This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at the BBC, where sinful members of the public come to tell their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception. I'm already thinking that this one is going to be slightly more together than last week's, when we recorded this little bit. It was like the very last thing that we did. We'd done the show. We'd done 4 shows, in fact. And it was 8 o'clock and the audience were desperate to leave. In fact, we had to plead with them not to go just to record this bit. And it was a little bit all over the place.
A bit D-mob happy, wasn't it? I couldn't work out who was shouting at who most. The audience shouting at us or us shouting at the audience.
We want to go. We were saying, please don't go just yet because we're trying to do a witty and entertaining introduction for the Confessions podcast.
Which we never did achieve. But something went out.
No, hopefully it was all cobbled together and you enjoyed it. At least the confessions last week were very good.
Yeah.
All the confessions from the comedians were fantastic.
Yeah, and despite a shorter week, we've got some great confessions for you, including Mr. C's au pair mishap, au pair of blue eyes. We have Rebecca's algebra story, teach your children smell. And of course, we uncover another classic confession from the crypt, especially requested by you.
Yeah, so we're going to start this week's podcast with, "Hey teacher, leave those ears alone."
Please be seated.
This one comes from the Reverend Graham. Thanks, Rev Graham. Father Simon, this confession has been weighing on my conscience for 40 years, and I feel that now is finally the time to unburden myself. It's always slightly more of a frisson when you know it's a priest who's about to unveil. During my final few years, as it were, at secondary school, we had a barking mad headmaster who was obsessed with making the most trivial announcements over the school PA system. I should have my loud hailer. Darn it. It all started during the 5th year prelim examinations when our headmaster had continued to make ridiculous announcements which reached into each and every classroom in the school. However, it was particularly bad in the assembly hall, as here the system consisted of 3 large and very loud speakers above both of the doors up onto the school stage. As you can imagine, in the middle of an exam, having your concentration broken by a booming voice requesting some poor soul in the first year to kindly report to the headmaster's office was just a little bit irritating. One day when we were all gathered in the assembly hall, we were asked if there was anything that could be done to help us during the exams. Yes, someone suggested. Could the headmaster stop using the PA system? Now, a perfectly reasonable request, you would think. Unfortunately, the headmaster didn't think so, as he continued to break everyone's concentration with his booming irrelevances during the exams. We don't need to know that it's steak and kidney pie for lunch, for example, headmaster. Just over halfway through my history exam, consisting of 6 essay questions out of the 8 questions set, the tannoy boomed into action, throwing everyone's concentration out of the window. How was I expected to pass? By the time I reached the 6th year, enough was enough. I'd been appointed a prefect in my final year, so when we were asked what the school could do to help us during the examinations, I once again requested that the headmaster stop using the wretched PA. To which the reply was once again he would try and keep his announcements to a minimum. However, we knew that the reality was he would go on making announcements no matter how irritating it had become to all the pupils sitting their exams. So between myself and Bob, the head prefect, we decided to take drastic measures. That lunchtime I went home and raided my father's toolbox, and armed with a screwdriver and a set of pliers, I returned to the school. Bob and I went into the assembly hall, and while Bob kept watch, I climbed up onto the handrails for the stairs and then up onto the stage. This gave me access. Can I just ask at this point, Joe, were you ever a prefect? Or a head girl? I bet you were.
That was it.
No, I just went. No, you weren't. Bobby?
No.
Oh, okay.
Were you?
I was a prefect once,
Were
but
you?
I had my badge taken away because I put my feet up during hymn rehearsal.
Oh.
But I got it back.
Cardinal sin.
Anyway, so it's fine. Anyway, I climbed up onto the handrails for the stairs up onto the stage. Our producer would just like it known that he was a prefect. Head boy, in
Head
fact.
boy.
This is getting better and better.
I don't think we had head girls and boys at our school.
Were you actually voted for? Did they vote for you? Was this before the days you
you
actually
rig it?
voted? By default, no one else got it. Anyway, back to the Reverend Graham. This gave me access to the conduit and connector plate for the wiring for the stage loudspeakers. Carefully unscrewing the back plate, I used the wire cutter section of the pliers to snip the wires in the connector box and then screwed the plate back in place. Just to be on the safe side, I did the box on the other side of the stage as well. The result was that there were no announcements that exam session. Not in the hall, anyway. The head had been talking into the microphone, like normal, so the rest of them got the news about the broken radiator in the science lab, the cabbage for lunch, and that Digby Minor had gone home with a temperature, like we needed to know. But we in the classrooms and corridors heard nothing because I had done all the disconnecting. And for quite some time after that, nobody heard anything because, Father Simon, here's the thing, I don't want to ask forgiveness of the headmaster. He was an idiot anyway, says the Reverend Graham.
Very peeved.
I don't want to ask forgiveness for the pupils either, because we all benefited from my act of wanton vandalism. I don't even want forgiveness from the teachers who, in appointing Bob and I as prefects, had given us a position of responsibility where we're expected to set an example to other students, and I think we did. Well, I seek forgiveness from the sound engineers who apparently were called in to try and trace the problem, and they took over 3 weeks to find the sabotage parts. It is to them that my call for mercy goes. Now, as a grown adult and a man of the cloth, I feel that I need to seek forgiveness and clear my troubled conscience. The school was knocked down several years after I left, and houses were built on the site. A brand new purpose-built school was then built at Ross Hall with a perfectly good and working PA system. So all's well that ends well. I suppose if the school is knocked down, then, it obviously wasn't going particularly well, was it? Anyway, Reverend Graham, casting aspersions at his head, who he describes a couple of times as an idiot. So
No way! Can he be forgiven? I mean,
so, what do you say, Joe?
call yourself a priest? No forgiveness here whatsoever. I hope you've been into a confessions booth or box somewhere and actually properly confessed this sin, because we can't possibly forgive this. It's poor sound engineers.
Because of the sound engineers picking up the tab.
Well, it's just a very bad thing to have done. It's a bad look. Very bad look for a priest.
All right, not looking good, Rev Graham. What do you say, Bobby?
Well, I'm going to disagree completely, because I think what you asked for, Reverend Graham, and you weren't a reverend then, was something fair and reasonable, and it did look after absolutely everyone. And of course, the head teacher didn't listen. It was fair, it was reasonable, it was necessary to do it because basically you had no choice. The other thing is, it wasn't wanton vandalism. You just snipped the wires. And the other thing, you're only asking for forgiveness of the sound engineers. If the sound is coming out every other speaker but the ones in the hall, the sound engineers equally taking 3 weeks to find it. Surely you check the wiring in the speakers. That is obvious. I blame the sound engineers completely. It's simple. The sound is coming out of everywhere else but this room. Let's check the speakers in here. 3 weeks. That's ridiculous. I think the sound engineers knew exactly what they were doing and taking 3 weeks. There you go.
Who rattled your cage?
Rev Graham, you are completely forgiven.
Wow.
For everything.
Wow.
I am very annoyed that I forgot my loud hailer to bring it in. So if anyone's got a confession that they'd like to send in, which actually involves a loud hailer and a tannoy system,
you go for that.
It'll be good.
See, I was brought up to respect authority. I'm shocked that you're forgiving.
Well, so the thing is that, some authority is wrong, and sometimes you have to do the right thing to do the wrong thing to do the right thing.
Anyway, it's the people's verdict. Do you forgive Reverend Graham, yes or no, before we lurch into anarchy?
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's comes from Mr. C. Thank you, Mr. C. Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective, my tale goes back a number of years, and I feel it's now time to unburden my guilt. To start this tale, I need to mention that I have been a stressed-out single parent for many years, and have so far successfully brought up my daughter since the age of 2, single-handed, which is not bad. Over the years, to help me with the childcare versus working dilemma, I have employed au pairs. It's been a little bit hit and miss, but it's a good solution and it's worked well. Our favourite au pair, Camilla from Poland, had left to complete her teaching qualification, and I decided to take on a new au pair called Aurelia, who was from France. It was arranged that I would pick up Aurelia from Luton Airport, and being a sensible chap, I took a picture of her to the airport. My daughter and I, who was 7 at the time, waited nervously at arrivals for several women, and they passed, but none looked remotely like
the woman in the picture. Then a lady smiled at us and she looked like the picture, except her hair was a little straighter. But anyway, I asked her if she was called Aurelia and was she an au pair. She said yes, and she seemed pleased that we recognised her. We exchanged pleasantries in my useless French and her broken English as we helped her with her trolley. We got to the car and loaded her very heavy luggage into the boot. She got in the front, my daughter in the back, and off we went out of the car park and headed for home. I asked her moments later how I should pronounce her name, and she explained it was said Marilia, with more of an M sound than an A sound at the beginning. That was funny. That was odd. Anyway, note to self, must get that right. It's got a silent M there. Anyway, then my phone started ringing, and I stopped the car to take the call. There you go, Bobby, you'll like that bit. The call was from a French-sounding woman asking if I was held up because she was waiting for me in arrivals. I know you're ahead of me on all this. I must have sounded somewhat flustered as my brain tried to comprehend what was occurring. Aurelia was already sitting in the car next to me, and now another Aurelia, how common is that, was on the phone in arrivals. Who was this person in the passenger seat? Could be the start of a horror movie, but it's not. I politely ended the call by muttering about being a little late and started driving again, trying to work out what exactly was occurring. I stopped the car again and I said to the person beside me, this woman I'd picked up, I said, "What's your name?" She said, "Marilia." Again, trying to hide my obvious anxiety, I said, yes, I know, but what's your surname? And she came back with a surname that I did not recognise. And the penny inevitably dropped, as it has done for everyone else listening. I looked at her, and then I looked at my daughter on the back seat and thought, I have definitely picked up the wrong au pair. And I asked another question. So, are you an au pair? Yes, she says. What is the family name that you're expecting? Mr. Digby, she says. Right. Well, I'm very sorry. You've got the wrong family. And I then quickly turned the car around and sped back to the airport. I tried to look calm and reassure the poor woman that all would be well in the end. We just needed to get back to the airport. My daughter was confused, but I explained that we just made a small mistake and we just needed to pop back to the airport and change her. Swap her over. We parked the car, and then I thought, I can't go back into the arrivals terminal. Just think of the embarrassment in front of the bewildered Digby family that our actual au pair would be wondering exactly what she got herself into. No, can't do that. So I asked Marilia if she had the number for the Digbys, and she said she did. So with that, we all rushed up the hill to the entrance. Marilia, I said, I'm very, very sorry, but I'll have to leave you here. Call Mr. Digby, and I'm sure he'll be with you very soon. Bye. And with that, I took my daughter's hand, dumped the luggage and the bewildered French au pair, and marched up to meet our real new employee. On entering the arrivals, I noticed a very worried-looking lady who, funnily enough, looked exactly like the woman in the picture, complete with long curly hair of the right colour. I'm so sorry, I said. Traffic was awful. In fact, très bad, I said. That's very poor. Merci beaucoup, let's go. My daughter looked confused again. Aurelia, the real Aurelia, looked relieved, if not a little worried, about what she let herself in for, and off we went. On the way down the hill, we passed the original Aurelia, or Marilia, on her phone. Stood by the bus stop, on her own. I shooed my daughter straight past, deliberately making sport. Look over there. And talking to the real Aurelia so as not to give the game away. We got in the car and took our new au pair home, trying not to worry about what happened to the other woman that I dumped at the entrance. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness. You're not going to get it. From the collective for my error and accidental time that I had with this French citizen from the airport. The obvious trauma this must have inflicted on the unfortunate Marilia, although we heard through the au pair grapevine later that she had been safely picked up.
Yeah, right.
I apologise to the people of France and Luton, and to the Digby family, whoever they are, and my daughter, for any trauma that was caused by my getting it wrong, picking up the wrong au pair person. Anyway, young Joe.
It was almost like Colin Firth from Love Actually was in the studio with us as he was telling that tale for a little bit. This is one of my favourite scenes from Love Actually.
Except I'm not going to speak any Portuguese.
No, okay. To forgive or not to forgive. Ditching Marilia in such a way I think is kind of unforgivable, really. Easy mistake to make, possibly, if you're looking at a very terrible photograph, but just to ditch her when you realise you got the wrong one.
Leave her at the bus stop.
Yeah, you can't do that. Should have found the Digbys, handed her over, and then moved on.
I know what Bobby's going to say, but let's check it out anyway. Yes.
Do you? Okay, so first of all, it sounds like Mr. C is trying to say, no au pairs were left abandoned in this story, where they actually were. So no matter how much you try and get out of it, obviously you're a lovely guy. You're single parent is tough. And, you're just dealing with all these women coming in. So I understand how the mistake was made. That's no problem. That's not your fault. But you should have handled it a bit differently. You could have rang the Digby's and said, I've got your woman in my car. I need to drop her off. Where are you? You could have just handled it so much better. You're bringing up a daughter. She needs an example. So I think, Mr. C, you need to take an example from your little one, because I think your 7-year-old will probably do better. So with Joe, you are unforgiven. Although I love you, really.
Absolutely.
The Confessions Podcast.
And we found out that Mr. C was not alone in his airport mishap, as one listener revealed her shameful story.
Claire Williams from Tenterden, totally forgiven. Exactly the same thing happened to me when I picked up Czech au pair Dana from the airport. I was halfway home to Kent before I realised I had the wrong Dana or Dana. Also had to return to the airport sheepishly, but hopefully did it with a bit more grace and
maybe didn't leave her at the bus stop.
Properly made sure that she was with the right family. So it's not uncommon, it would seem, this au pair apprehension.
It seems astonishing to me.
So to come on this week's podcast, find out what happened next in this gassy confession.
I put one foot forward to deliver the requested paper, and a loud "parp" and rather noxious wind bellowed across the room. I froze, knowing that my behind had probably not finished, but in the knowledge that I had to get the paper to Peter.
Your delivery was impeccable, can I just say? That made me laugh a lot.
There's something about the word "parp" which sort of works in that context. Before we have the rude reveal, it's time to head over to the parish notice board to find out what you, the parish, have been gossiping about. Bobby, has anyone managed to sneaky subscribe this week, as far as we know?
Yes, they have. Caleb, aged 10, has successfully completed his mission. He says, Dear Simon, Joe and Bobby, it is the first day of our holidays in the Lake District and my mum has just got a new mobile phone. We listen to your podcast whenever we have a long car journey because my dad gets it on his phone. My dad said he's been listening to Confessions ever since he was at school when you were at Radio 1.
That's right, yes.
And Caleb says, I can't quite believe that. Were you really at Radio 1?
What do you mean you can't believe it? Have things changed so much?
Yes.
Come on, we're still playing the same stuff.
Anyway, Caleb says, I persuaded my dad to take a photo. I persuaded my dad to take photo evidence that I've subscribed my mum's new phone to the Confession podcast. She's asleep at the moment and doesn't know, and so it would be great for her to discover on our next car journey. Keep podcasting. It makes the long car journeys much more fun. That's Caleb Reese, aged 10, with a little help from Dad.
And there is a photo of Caleb, who definitely knows what a good podcast sounds like. He's in his pyjamas, and there he is actually subscribing on his mum's phone.
Giving us the thumbs up.
Yes, thank you. We also had a special delivery from a lovely young lady called Helena, aged 11, who sent us a box. It's got a note on the front. It's big, so it's a red cardboard box which she's done the painting on.
Very well made, Helena.
Arts and crafts, yeah.
Excellent.
And it's got a door at the front, hinged with tape. This is a Confessions post box. There is chocolate inside.
Is there?
Yum. Pass it over.
You didn't show us that bit. You just showed us the... Oh.
One each.
Now you're talking.
It's a caramel crunch biscuit.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
Helena, thank you so much. That's so nice.
This is a new feature where you send us stuff, which is...
Which we're going to encourage.
Yeah, that's right.
Chocolate always
on
welcome.
Test Match Special, people send in cakes, don't they, and that kind of thing. So I think, anything that you want to send us is perfectly fine.
So I've got an email here from a mum who's brought her daughter into the Confessions community. Nikki Taylor from Colchester, hi Nikki, says, Dear Simon, Joe and the lovely Bobby, moral compass.
Oh, lovely.
That's what you are.
Am I lovely?
Yeah, well, you're lovely and you're the moral compass.
Sometimes.
I've put pen to paper tonight to share my utter joy and delight with you and my fellow fans of the Confessions podcast. I experienced a very proud mummy moment this week when my lovely daughter, Meg, aged just 11 years young, subscribed herself to the podcast and, in fact, has taken to walking around the house listening to your entire back catalogue. I first got her into this absolute gem of a podcast some 2 weeks ago when I had to keep her off school with a serious bout of sickness. She, in fact, missed a school trip to a local lake that day, and as you can imagine, she was not a happy bunny. I was tasked with not only mopping her brow, cleaning up after each episode, yuck, and keeping her hydrated, but also with cheering her up. After trying to find something, anything, to interest an 11-year-old with a serious case of the grumps, I finally decided to put on a Confessions podcast. And as they say, the rest is history. She was riveted, and we both laughed out loud on numerous occasions that day and on many more since. I want to thank you, lovely lot, for cheering up my poorly poppet and, in the process, giving her and I something to share and to enjoy together. These days, as she approaches those dreaded teenage years, it's getting a little harder for us to find common ground. We both know that you have a very limited supply of lovely bits of merch and would be ever so happy if you could see fit to send something our way. Oh, look what is flying through the air here and it's about to land upon you.
So this is Rosie from our production team. Thank you, Rosie. No, you say it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
There you go. Very theatrical. And it's a...
Good job she had acting lessons, hey?
That's true. One of our finest. It's a Radio 2 mug.
Woo!
That's
right. I do that whoop thing. I'm allowed to do it on that occasion.
Hang on, and there's something else here. This looks like a black T-shirt, which says "In Concert"
Oh, really?
on one side and BBC Radio 2 on the other.
There you go.
I haven't seen these before.
Meg, you are in luck. Actually, that might be a bit
Do you
roomy.
wear these when doing the intros?
No. I don't think they've existed. Maybe I'm going to towards the end of the year. When
Maybe
we do
there's
more
kind
in
of
concerts.
maybe there's a uniform.
Could be
which
the
we all
uniform,
have to
yeah.
wear.
I think there might be producer Phil's when he does our warm-ups.
I think they're warm downs, aren't they? That he does. Anyway, so that's a love. Anyway, Nikki, thank you very much indeed. We'll send you the T-shirt and we'll send you the mug. Remember, if you want to get in touch with the podcast, you might have a confession of your own, or want to request a classic one that made you laugh out loud all those months or years ago. Tell us, if you can, exactly where you heard it and when you were listening to it. The address for everything, confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Now it's time for the unpleasant part of the notice board, or the favourite part of the notice board, the non-compliant confessions that didn't make it to the radio for a number of reasons, mainly that they would get our producer fired. These are confessions from shameless people who clearly have no moral compass or any idea what's suitable for tea time listening.
First one we pulled out of our murky mailbag came from Dan, who clearly didn't stop and think whether his confession was suitable for tea time listening. Dan, I understand you wanted to get your own back on the abusive customer you had to serve every week in the pizza shop. But was adding a charcoal daddy longlegs to his pizza really the best way to do it?
No.
It's not fair on the daddy long legs, is it?
Bad.
There you go.
Jake's confession, meanwhile, is so particularly vile that we can't even really hint at it. But it does involve an 11-year-old's lemonade stand, a very, very hot day, and an emergency but not hygienic way of topping up the lemonade when it ran out. How could you do that?
What's wrong with that? That's okay. We could have done that.
If you're Bear Grylls, maybe.
Perhaps the most shocking story of the week comes from Mrs. B, who, in an attempted act of kindness towards her tired husband, went to fetch his mobility scooter from the house while he waited by the car. Having not driven it before, Mrs. B thought it would be a doddle, right up until the point she lost control and ran straight into her husband, knocking him over. Luckily, only his pride was damaged. But how could you run over your own husband?
Quite easily.
That would have been fine. We could have done that one. Everyone would have loved it.
Of course, they laugh about it now, don't they?
That is quite something else. Anyway, I think they're perfectly fine. But obviously, the producer decided otherwise. If you have a confession, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Time now to get back to the confessions that did make the cut this week. Here's Rebecca's algeBRA malfunction. Teach your children smell. algeBRA. Get it?
Yeah, no, I got that.
I did too.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's tale comes from Rebecca. Dear Simon, Joe and the Cacophony of Atonement. Which kind of makes that you, Bobby. You are the Cacophony of Atonement.
All on her own.
All by
Perfectly
myself.
capable of that.
I've been a dedicated listener for many years. In fact, given that my husband and I have very different tastes in music, the only thing that we agree on is listening to the Confessions feature when we travel to and from work, usually on the podcast. I'm a teacher, and as anyone who was taught in a secondary school would know, as much as you try to treat all the little darlings with the same level of care and attention, there is always that one exceptional pupil who can just wind you up something rotten and really, really get under your skin. I have a feeling already that teachers will be telling us anonymously, precisely who those annoying children are. Well, for me, that student, says Rebecca, was Peter. He was the kind of student who picked up on every typo on the board, laughed when technology failed, as if, and took great glee if someone mispronounced a word when reading to the group. Peter was never short of his supply of backhanded remarks, criticisms and comments. Drove me crazy. Well, you can imagine Peter's glee when one small day, whilst I was invigilating an exam, the following happened. Imagine a silent, small exam room with about 20 students all carefully engaged in demonstrating their mathematical acumen. Peter, a mathematical whiz kid, raised his hand for additional paper. I put one foot forward to deliver the requested paper, and a loud "parp" and rather noxious wind bellowed across the room. I froze, knowing that my behind had probably not finished, but in the knowledge that I had to get the paper to Peter. So with a little hesitation, I continued to make my way towards Peter's desk, the silence of the exam room being broken by the loud issuance of wind that accompanied each step. You know when that happens? It's always embarrassing, but you don't normally do it in front of many children. Peter looked triumphant as the students were all distracted by my musical accompaniment to their exam, happy in the knowledge that I had to keep making more steps to reach the desk. But this, I'm afraid to say, is only the start of the tale, because it seemed I had an unfitting revenge up my sleeve just 1 week later. This indeed is just the opening salvo. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in algebra class when I noticed a sharp pain in my left side, just below my chest. Putting it down to indigestion, I carried on with the lesson, continuing to gesticulate with much gusto, as I am prone to do. The sharp pain came again, but maths education being important, I ignored it and carried on. Peter, as usual, raised his hand to challenge some well-regarded mathematical law that everyone's agreed on like forever, when suddenly the underwire of my bra sprang out of the top of my blouse and flew with extraordinary power, like in a cartoon, across the classroom and hit Peter smack between the eyes. Imagine such a thing. Fortunately, the wire had flown so fast, he had no idea it was my undergarments that had been the source of the curved wire, and being a maths nerd, he had no concept of what the actual source of such a shaped wire might be in the first place. Needless to say, I did not own up, but hastily retrieved the wire and gave a general chat to the class about the naughtiness of throwing objects indoors, because no one had owned up. I gave him a good telling off. So, clearly the forgiveness here is not from Peter, who made many a good teacher's life a misery, but from the class whose maths exam I disrupted, and for whom I really put the bra in the algeBRA, if you see what I'm saying. Maybe you'll forgive me for that. And for giving them a telling off for throwing objects around when I knew that it was me all along. Now, I'm amazed that such a thing is actually technically possible.
Yes.
That would happen.
With that accuracy.
Well, I think that is just absolute serendipity, isn't it?
That's fantastic that it actually got it between the eyes.
The right one between the eyes.
Yes.
I dream of needing a wire in a bra, can I just say? I've never owned one of those. Vests for me.
We're already veering into unexpected territory. Anyway, Joe, what do you say to Rebecca?
I think the rest of the class knew exactly what had happened, and I think that they secretly were applauding what happened, because he was obviously one of those kids who just annoyed absolutely everybody. So I think they would have gone, "Yes, good shot, miss." So forgive him.
Okay, all right. Bobby.
I love this. I absolutely love this. I think it's amazing that it can shoot out, but they do. When they're not safely stitched in and they work their way out, and one move and boom. Yeah, usually in the washing machine, and then you have to call an engineer to kind of unwrangle it. Once they're bent, they're very difficult to bend back. So, Joe, I can say I don't think you've missed out on anything.
Okay, thank you, Bobby.
I think you're fine. I think you're absolutely fine. You haven't missed out. I love this, and I think actually you got him back. The problem with Peter is, of course, he's not given enough to do. That's the problem with Peter. He's obviously super smart, and you should have made him prefect or something. There you go. Or you could have given him a physics exam with that.
Or just kicked him out.
Don't think you're allowed to.
For being
I think he's
irritating.
a very, very clever
No.
person. You are forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Rebecca's confession, Teach Your Children Smell, which started something of a debate on the people's verdict about whether bra wires can come loose like this. And it also prompted this mini confession from another teacher. Forgiven, one of the joys of teaching is dropping an SBD
Silent but deadly.
in a quiet class and walking off, leaving the kids to blame each other. Really? You come from a teaching family?
I do, and they certainly wouldn't do anything like that. I should say, having heard that again, the SPD is the German Social Democratic Party, but I imagine it was an SBD, in which case it was silent but deadly, because you wouldn't sort of wander past anyone and leave them a Social Democratic Party, would you? Have you done an SDP?
Did I really say SDP?
No, you said
I meant to
SP.
say SB. Oh, it sounded like SPD.
Yeah, you did say SPD, but it should have been SBD, silent
I
but
knew I was
deadly.
saying SBD because I was reading, but it obviously
yeah, play it again.
didn't. I wasn't plosive enough with my B. Forgiven, one of the joys of teaching is dropping an SBD. Oh, I did say P. You win.
Anyway. So thank you very much indeed. Anyway, that's almost it from this week's batch of confessions. If you want to send in your own shadowy secret, cringy catastrophe or bashful bad behaviour thing, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Don't go anywhere just yet. It's time now for our weekly trawl through the archives to dig out a confession from the crypt.
And this week's has been requested by Alice, who says, "Dear Simon, Joe and Bobby, I'm a big fan of your Confessions podcast and a devoted Wittertaney, but that's another story. This is because for a number of years, it's been the primary source of all of my conversations with my stepdad, Paul. I phone home. Paul answers the landline and says, 'Your mum's in the shed, hold on.' And then we amiably discuss the latest podcast while he finds her. This is a very good system and he is a very good stepdad. Over the years, Confessions has thus become an important part of our relationship. I thought it'd be a nice idea to get you to read out his favourite confession from the crypt. I know that it's about a man, his daughter's class hamster, and some stairs." In July 2014, Paul bravely reenacted the entire story, complete with flailing limbs, during the most awkward and uncomfortable brunch imaginable, when I had stupidly decided to invite my divorced mum and my dad and Paul to the same celebratory meal the day after my graduation. This was a strained affair, to say the least, for many of the reasons that you can imagine. My girlfriend was having a root canal at the time, and I would have happily traded places with her. You could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. Therefore, I don't remember much about Paul's hamster story, except wanting him to stop talking immediately so that I could retreat to a dark corner of my mind and wait for the sweet release of death. I hope you can help. Alice Kelly, Livingston.
Well, that's a fine email, Alice. Thank you very much indeed. And after much digging, the team have found it. So please enjoy this week's classic confession, which we're calling Michael Row Rodent, the Boat Ashore.
I think it's one of your finest, Simon, one of your finest that you've read. And I am going to say this because normally anything with hamsters, any worry about, did anything happen? It did happen, but it will be okay in the end.
Don't spoil it. You don't know.
No, I'm just saying broader picture. It will be okay in the end.
Anyway, forget what Bobby says. Who knows what's going to happen? Here it is.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon, when my daughter Annie was 4 years old, she attended a lovely nursery in West Yorkshire. Staff there cared deeply for the development of their young wards and looked for new and exciting ways to help them learn and grow into responsible adults. One day, my daughter returned home from nursery gushing about a family of hamsters that had taken up residence at nursery for the children to care for. There was a mum and 5 extremely cute and fluffy babies that the children doted on. Apparently, children who were well behaved and displayed all the qualities of responsibility expected were allowed to take the family home for the weekend to care for. In the weeks that followed, Annie became a model child. Attentive, helpful, polite. In fact, just the kind of child any sensible adult would trust with a family of hamsters for the weekend. Astute confession aficionados will realise that we're into hamster territory for a confession. It's been a rich theme over the years. Unsurprisingly, her miraculous behaviour was noted by the nursery staff, and Annie was chosen as the following weekend's hamster carer. She could not have been more proud and excited. When I arrived on the Friday evening, Annie was beside herself with anticipation of this great responsibility. We carefully picked up the hamster cage with its wheel, water bottle and little pottery cottage for a bedroom and headed for the car. "Be careful, Dad," called Annie. "Put them in the front seat, not the back." In a voice that was getting just a little bossy. "Put the seatbelt round the cage," she yelled, getting into role as hamster protector just a little too enthusiastically. Eventually, after double and triple checking the hamsters were suitably arranged for the journey, we set off to the instructional monologue from Annie. It turns out that a 4-year-old hamster carer is also an expert at safe driving technique, at least in the context of hamster relocation. Anyway, On arrival home, we carefully manoeuvred the cage and its residents into the house and positioned the cage in pride of place on the coffee table in the front room. It's worth noting at this point that we lived in a one up, one down and one down again house. The front room was at ground level, bedroom squeezed in upstairs, and the kitchen down a set of steps in the basement. Here, I had concluded the hamsters would be happiest because it was cool. I told Annie of my idea and, wanting to impress her with the care I was taking, carefully picked up the cage with a hand at either side. The cage was one of those plastic trays with a wire section over the top, a bit like an old-fashioned budgie cage. I gazed down through the bars of the cage into the eyes of the mother hamster. She was content, settled, and seemed genuinely grateful for the care we were showing her and for her babies. Yes, of course she was.
How does she know?
Turning towards the stairs down... There's trouble coming. Turning towards the stairs down to the kitchen, Annie asked if she could carry the cage down. She was extremely serious in her role as hamster protector, but this was clearly a job for an adult, and I told her so. With a hand on either side of the cage, with a flat palm pressed against the wire, I arrived at the top of the stairs and gripped the cage firmly for the descent. Oh, no. Unbeknown to me, the wire top section of the cage was attached to the plastic tray bottom by a clip on either side, which, interestingly, was operated by pushing the sides of the cage inwards. Oh, it was at this point that a series of things happened at the same time. At the exact moment the cage was positioned above the top step down to the kitchen, the pressure exerted by my hands became sufficient to detach the clips holding the plastic tray in the bottom of the cage. Standing motionless at the top of the stairs, I gazed down through the bars into the eyes of the mother as the tray detached. The tray fell as though in slow motion towards the top step containing the 6 hamsters, a small pottery cottage, and a large amount of sawdust and torn toilet roll. The mother gazed up at me for a
Oh, yeah, we're investing a lot into this, aren't we?
For a moment,
yes.
Puzzled by her sudden weightlessness.
That's exactly what was happening. Yeah. Oh, why am I so weightless? Yeah.
I stared into her diminishing eyes, still clutching the wire cage top, and then the tray hit the edge of the top step. Oh. The tiny cottage bounced down the stairs and shattered into tiny pieces.
Never mind the cottage.
I'm getting to it. The tray teetered on the top step and then slid down the stairs, carrying its hamster family downwards ever faster like the most surprised surfers of all time. Whoosh, they went to the bottom. I stood motionless for a moment while Annie looked past me and simply said in a calm voice, "Dad, you've dropped the hamsters." It was then I sprang into action. Before the stunned hamsters could regain their senses and run for cover, I inverted the cage section and leapt carefully among the devastation to scoop the now squealing hamsters into the cage. Having counted the hamsters in, I reattached the plastic tray to the upturned cage. After what I'd put them through, I thought it best to leave the hamsters in the quiet and dark to recover. After a fitful night's sleep, racked with remorse, I went downstairs on Saturday morning, wondering, to be honest, how many would have made it through the night. However, to my complete surprise, all 6 hamsters were pottering around their cage as though nothing had happened. I was saved. Over the weekend, Annie and I bought a new pottery cottage for them to sleep in, replaced the sawdust and toilet roll inners. In fact, by Monday, they were a merry little hairy family again. When I dropped Annie off at the nursery, like any good father, I warned her never to speak of what had happened and concocted a story about dropping the pottery cottage while cleaning it or something. The staff were extremely grateful for me replacing the breakage, and Annie was praised for doing such a good job of looking after the hamsters. My work was done. After a rather buoyant day at work, safe in the knowledge that my secret was safe, I returned to the nursery to collect Annie. On arriving, I was approached by a staff member with a solemn face. She said she was sorry to have to tell me, but Annie had been in trouble for telling lies all day. Apparently, she had made up some story involving hamsters, the stairs, surfing, and lots of squealing. She explained that Annie had been told in no uncertain terms that lying was not acceptable. In the face of her insistence that she was telling the truth, she was told her story couldn't possibly be true because her daddy would have said so in the morning. From the corner of my eye, I stared at my shoes. I could see Annie standing across the play area, looking furious with her arms crossed, the way a 4-year-old most certainly can. I mumbled something about speaking to Annie about her behaviour and whisked her away without catching anyone's eyes. The journey home was one of tears, of me saying, well, perhaps they didn't understand, or maybe they didn't need to know all the details, that kind of thing. The matter was never discussed again, except when Annie wants to embarrass me at family meals. She is now a beautiful and clever 18-year-old woman. I would, however, like to beg the forgiveness of the collective and listeners for the distress I inadvertently caused the hamster mother and her babies in breaking their china house. I would also like to apologise to the nursery staff for withholding the detail of the weekend's events, which is not the same as lying. But most of all, I'd like to apologise to Annie for getting her in trouble at nursery and putting her through that traumatic ordeal, even if she still dines out on it. After all, she turned out okay in the end. And the hamsters were fine. Is there a problem? Maybe not. I don't know. Sister Rebecca.
I love that confession, the idea of the mother hamster gazing into his eyes.
Forlornly. Someone's watched too many
Repeatedly.
Pixar.
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? First of all, actually, someone should have just told them the correct way to carry this cage. So I don't think that Michael should feel guilty about having dropped the hamsters. In a way, he should have just made a joke out of it and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I dropped the hamsters, but they're fine." That would have been a good way round it, because obviously Annie had this, she's a very upright 4-year-old
Yes.
and didn't understand, the benefit of a white lie, perhaps, and was right to tell the truth. So it was a difficult one. I think he could have got out of it in a bit of a better way, just by rather than just saying, "Don't tell them, don't tell them." So I think he should have told them, but then there was no harm done, and Annie is just making a joke of it
So
now.
therefore,
he's forgiven.
hamster surfer dudes, what do you think, Brother
Well,
Matthew?
I have to say, at the start of every confession where a hamster's mentioned or gerbil, I always fear for them. I fear that, something's obviously going to happen. And the fact that they got through this one, I think we should celebrate that. But also, I think that the world is divided into those who believe that their children should lie for them and those that don't. And I'm firmly in the former camp. Frankly, you're under my roof, and whilst you're under my roof, you're going to be lying for me. And if that involves lying to your teachers, don't grass me up and tell the teachers that I sent your hamsters riding down the stairs on a tray. So for that reason, I am going to forgive, because frankly, it was Annie grassing up her dad to her teachers that caused the whole problem in the first place.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt this week, with added appearances from Sister Rebecca and Brother Matt. And you were absolutely right, Bobby. It was all okay in the end.
Didn't want anyone not to listen because they were too upset.
Doesn't always end up well, does it, with hamsters?
Should we do that bit
rarely.
again?
Well,
Should
in
we do
the
that
old
bit again, and I
days-
won't give away the kind of ending.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. In the old days, you could do a confession with a hamster or a goat, or a rat or a mouse.
Don't
Goat
ask him
or a
about.
pigeon.
No, please don't.
No,
there's
so
she'll be
many.
as upset as Jo
No,
will be as
she
upset.
won't.
Yes, she
She'll be
will.
entertained.
No, she won't.
What
She'll be
happened
as
to the
upset.
goat?
No, don't, Jo.
Went
don't.
down a well.
Did it live?
Nope. I've got a good story about a pigeon.
Well, pigeons
li-
I feel less sympathy for.
A little.
I got you as well.
There's a pigeon and a little bit of sodium from the chemistry lab.
Anyway, let's move on, shall we? If you have a request for a vintage confession that doesn't include or involve a goat or a pigeon, send us as many details as you can, including when it first went out, to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our very best to dig them out from the crypt.
Virtually the end of the podcast. Regular listeners will know that each week we ask you to tweet us a special code phrase to prove you've listened all the way to the bitter end, because this is the bitter end. And this week's code phrase is, "I wish I had a wire in my bra."
I like the one about vests. When you said it's vests for me, I thought it was funny.
So that's it for this week. If you have something you want to get off your chest, then do send in your own confession to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
I suppose underwiring is something you want to get off your chest, isn't it? Does that count? Oh, come on.
Yeah, but then some people just can't. And it's a necessary thing, isn't it?
Sometimes.
Well,
It would be disastrous if you did.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, this is intriguing stuff. I feel a bit excluded. Anyway, if you haven't already done so, don't forget you can subscribe to the Confessions podcast, and you can hear our show 5 p.m. weekdays on BBC Radio 2. Jo and Bobby, thank you.
Farewell, Simon.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mum.
But thank you most.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.